South Africans are heading to the polls today in what's set to be the country's most crucial election since the end of apartheid 30 years ago. 27 million registered voters are set to elect a new parliament, which then chooses a president. And for the first time since 1994, the African National Congress is at risk of losing its outright majority and could be forced to negotiate a coalition. The ANC was once led by the late Nelson Mandela, who helped win freedom for Black South Africans after decades of apartheid. But now, with inequality and unemployment on voters' minds, many are hoping for change. Delano D'Souza reports.
Long queues outside polling stations as Africa's largest economy heads to the polls. Wednesday's vote is seen as one of South Africa's most pivotal, as support for the ruling African National Congress has begun to wane. According to projections, the ANC may lose its majority for the first time since it came to power in 1994 under Nelson Mandela.
I just wanted to be the first one to take out the ANC. I'm sick and tired. The youth don't work. They have at least 3 degrees with no jobs. If there are jobs, they're given to friends of the ANC.
We are hoping that things will change because our biggest problem, our children are not working. 30 years old, I'm still maintaining a son of 30-something years. He went to university, but no job.
South Africa has a population of 62 million and the average age is just 28. Many of the country's first-time voters grew up only knowing the ANC, and they blame the party for South Africa's numerous problems, including power outages, corruption, crime, and an unemployment rate that stands at nearly 33%.
We are young and there's no job for youth. We have degrees, we're not getting jobs.
This is definitely my first time voting. I'm excited, and I hope to see something different in the future.
I'm just really interested on where this country is going to go now from this election because it's really a critical point right now.
Voters in South Africa vote for a party which in turn chooses the president. Cyril Ramaphosa is seeking a second term in office and defended his record during the campaign. Polls are due to close at 9 p.m. local time, with results due out on Sunday.
Richard Calland is a law professor at the University of Capetown, and he joins me now live to talk a bit more about the election in South Africa today. Richard, thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts? Could this mark the end of the ANC's majority there?
I think that's more likely than not, though. I think all the smart money is on the ANC dropping below 50%. That's clearly a watershed moment. They've dominated the electoral scene for 6 national elections and 30 years. It's what I've been calling a second transition. Obviously, the first transition 30 years ago was out of apartheid, as your package suggested. Now, the second transition is out of that period of electoral dominance by the ANC. So we're going to have to get used to a more cluttered, more competitive, and probably more complicated political landscape.
Indeed. More complicated, though, could mean looking at some kind of coalition building if the ANC loses below 50%. What kind of post-election coalition could we be looking at?
It will hinge very much on where exactly the ANC vote lands. If they are between, say, 46 and 49, the ANC will be able to put together a relatively easy and comfortable coalition. President Ramaphosa will probably remain in office, and life will continue more or less as it is. Below 46, we enter a period of far greater uncertainty and complexity. And it will be difficult then for the ANC to make a choice about who would be a reliable, stable partner. Our experience of coalitions so far at local government level has not been a happy one. A series of really unstable coalitions have denuded citizens of good governance in cities as important as Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Port Elizabeth. So that's the, I think, anxiety or the concern here, that in fact, maybe the devil you know is better than an alternative that is less stable.
Well, talk us through the ANC challengers. What are the other parties that could be the big winners today?
Well, the interesting thing there is that for the last, say, 20 years, the Democratic Alliance has been the main opposition party. But as the ANC declines, it's not the DA that is necessarily going to benefit, because the opposition landscape has also become more competitive and more cluttered. There are new runners and riders like Action SA and the Patriotic Alliance, quite populist parties. And one of the big issues for the future, Jenny, is Is this going to be a switch now to a more mature, multi-party democracy, or are we going to find a much more fractured and splintered landscape where populist parties can prosper and the void at the middle that the ANC will, in a sense, create as it weakens may become a real weakness for our democracy?
Indeed, because it does seem like a coalition could be a risky gamble moving toward a stable government.
Well, that's right. And I think, again, for me, 46, which I happen to think is certainly my prediction, more or less, for the outcome. If the ANC goes below 46, as I say, much more complicated. They may have to choose, for example, between a coalition with the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a very kind of hard nationalist populist party, inherently unstable, an unreliable partner probably, or the Democratic Alliance, which is a Christian Democrat right-of-centre party. Both the ANC and the DA will find it difficult to sell that to their constituency. But for both parties, it may well be the most stable and the most consistent option were the political leadership of those two parties to be able to rise to the occasion. And they would probably, in those circumstances, package it as a government of national unity.
Richard, what are for you the biggest issues facing voters in South Africa today?
Well, it's clear that jobs, we have a sort of 35 to 50% unemployment rate, which is, of course, extremely problematic and challenging. We have a sluggish economy that isn't driving growth and jobs. And we have a really difficult crime rate. So I think the core issues for voters are jobs and security at home.
Well, what about for young voters? Something like less than 50% of South Africans under the age of 20 even registered to vote today. Where is all of that apathy coming from?
That's a really important point, and I'm glad you raise it. A third of our eligible voters, that's 13.7 million voters, failed to register for this election. After 30 years, they've effectively turned their back on democracy or electoral democracy. And 7 or 8 million of those are under the age of 30. That's a real concern. It suggests either that there is a sort of dry tinder group of revolutionaries in waiting, or perhaps simply that the current political leadership and parties has been unable to offer a value proposition that is enticing enough for those young voters.
You know, Richard, I think everyone agrees that perhaps 30 years in power is too long for any party. Let's say that South Africa does move towards some sort of coalition with the ANC and with other parties. Do you think things will be better for the country that way? Are you hopeful for what will come out of this election?
Well, the contradiction here is that whilst the ANC as an organization is in decline, it's in many ways broken, there are large parts of it that are corrupt, it's highly divided, it lacks any new ideas or fresh thinking. But on the other hand, the ANC in government, particularly around Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, and the people he's been appointing into government, in fact, have been introducing really important reforms. And although the pace of change in the last few years has not been as sharp and as bold as many would say we need, it is steady progress, and we are heading slowly in the right direction. An example of that is the absence of load shedding now, the fact that electricity sector reforms are beginning to kick in and work. So I would argue that the best thing for the country is a few more years of Mr. Ramaphosa as president, rather than turning to a kind of very messy and uncertain coalition arrangement.
All right, Richard, thanks for that. Richard Calland there speaking to me from Cape Town.